morning, everyone, and welcome to Web Summit. If this is your first time in Lisbon, I promise it's usually a bit more sunnier than this. Unfortunately, Roxana Dobresco couldn't make it today. She had a flight problem. I hear that's happening a lot today. But because we have Maria Colacorcio from Syndio to talk about how AI and data can help make pay more equitable and hiring more fair. So Maria, my first question to you is pretty simple. In this day and age when hiring can happen anywhere, what does talent really mean now?
Great question, and thank you so much for having me. It's such a treat. I apologize. I'm from Seattle, so I brought the weather with me. So you can blame me for the dreary clouds and rain. So it's a great question. What does talent really mean? In the age of AI, and I'm sure you're hearing a ton of it at this conference, it's about curiosity, it's about adaptability, agility. It's the notion of, is this person a constant learner? We know already that the folks that approach the workforce as workers, as employees, as talent, with a curiosity and desire to learn are going to perform better. But here's the kicker. The moment you find that person, the moment you find the talent that has all those characteristics, the very first decision, what we pay them, is the most important decision. And it's not just an important decision between the employer and the worker. It sends a signal to your entire organization about what you value. And that decision compounds itself into your culture, and whether your culture becomes one that values the things that matter, like being a learner and being curious and adaptable, or whether you value something else.
Those skills, curiosity, adaptability, they're very hard to quantify and put into numbers or translate into a pay package. So I'm curious to understand, how do you evaluate those skills and how do you translate that into the compensation package that you're paying someone? How do you define the word of, being sociable, being curious, being proactive, being agile? That's not a set hard skills that you're bringing to the table.
It's a great question. And what you'll notice, and you've probably heard a million times over at this conference, there's so many AI tools and technologies applied to selection, applied to how do we find the right candidates, how do we do the matching, how do we sift through the thousands and thousands of resumes to identify who we want to hire. We start after that, at the moment of pay, when you decide what you value. I think what's really important about this is that moment of pay, that decision compounds over time. So if you think about what you value, as you look to the future, every moment of pay is a data point that you're collecting. And if you capture those data points, if you document them with consistency, suddenly you have incredible intelligence as to, are the premiums you're applying to that talent on day one actually playing out for your organization later on? If you apply a premium because someone's ex-Google, what does that look like at the performance review 12 months down the line? So I think it's really important as you think about what you value, the moment you set that pay decision, don't let it get lost in a black hole. Actually keep track of, what do we value, and are the things we're valuing on day one actually playing out in terms of our comp philosophy on months 12 through 18?
Well, this theme that brings us here, the new hiring map, it's really about how people, not tools, redefine work, opportunity, strategy. So we often talk about automation and data as if they're replacing the workforce, but it's really more about changing and redrawing where and how you find the right people. So how do you do that?
In today's environment, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by how many tools and technologies there are. You're being constantly bombarded with them. One of the things that the EU Pay Transparency Directive is trying to do is to embed fairness and equity into those decisions. And that really comes with explainability. So again, there's this relationship between human beings, between workers, as you say, and their employers, where if you're trading your work for compensation, it's key in a lot of these compliance measures that you're able as an organization to articulate, why do you pay what you pay? So in this landscape,
of fairness.
Exactly, it's a matter of fairness.
How do you balance fairness with being data driven when hiring Can AI help with the question of fairness?
So as we all know, there's tons of bias that's been embedded in hiring, that's been embedded in pay. Things like the EU Pay Transparency Directive are really seeking to combat that. And what we've seen with generic LLMs is that if you don't intervene with a human in the loop, if you don't intervene to this technology, if you just plug all your data into a generic LLM without guardrails, without making sure that you're intervening to eradicate the bias will simply persist. So it is
Do you believe
really
bias
critical.
in, bias out?
Absolutely, and it's proven, bias in, bias out. There's been a couple of studies done that show when you ask generic LLMs what to pay people, if you give any hint, even of a name, the LLM will take that and apply some sort of bias to that, therefore resulting in lower pay for things that it interprets are women. So that's why it's really key to have those guardrails embedded into any technology.
I was left wondering about the impact this has on the culture side of the organization. It seems there's this lingering tension between efficiency and empathy, but there's also a counterintuitive story there.
It's so true. So many organizations, I don't know who in the audience, how many of you have cost mandates, cost efficiency mandates right now around AI? Who's being told, do more with less, do it with AI?
Wow.
So that's a lot of hands. So you're not alone. So many organizations today are saying you need to do more with less, and there's this cost efficiency mandate coming down. The key is that you have that human in the loop, because AI can do a ton in terms of automating and driving efficiency, but the thing it can also do that's actually more important is help you derive insight from decisions. So again, if you think about pay and you think about intelligence, every single data point is an opportunity to learn whether your comp philosophy is actually working or not. And it's sending a signal to your people about, are you a pay for performance culture? So when you think about balancing cost efficiency and streamlining and taking the grunt work out of organizations and operations, that's really key. But the other side of it is think about the power in embedding AI to analyze so that you're not just regurgitating data, you're actually deriving interesting insights that can make you better. And that's going to require that human in the loop.
It's almost as if the companies that are trying to move slower to stay fair are actually creating more inequity by denying technology.
Yeah, and I don't know that it'll be slow, particularly when you embed technologies like what we provide with Cindy, our agent. It streamlines the relationship between compensation and talent so that pay recommendations are seamless to the front line, whether it's people managers making those decisions or recruiters. So it does speed things up, but you have to ensure the foundation and the guardrails embedded in the technology really take things like pay equity into account. Take in market rate, take in HRIS, take in your offer data, all of those things, but it has to be in a balanced way.
You were talking about human intuition. So when you're bringing a ton of automation, a ton of data into the process, how do you keep space for that? How do you keep space for that, gut feeling that you have to have when you're hiring?
So some of the issues with how people perceive that cultural fit moment is that the cultural fit, or a lot of folks will call it the beer test. I was just put through the beer test, which means, would I have a beer with this person? The problem with those moments, yeah, exactly. The problem with those moments is that they're filled with bias. So if you're a company, what you need to be able to think about is, what are the premiums that we value? So let's go back to the example I gave earlier. Let's say you value folks that are coming from Google or Meta or the big companies. This is something that your organization values and applies a premium to. There's nothing wrong with documenting and saying, as part of your comp philosophy, we pay more for people that came out of these big tech companies. But again, those are data moments that if you track those over time, you can apply incredible intelligence to figure out, do those people actually perform better? What do their performance reviews look like? Are they staying more than 12 months? Are they leaving? Are they getting separated? All of those moments are intelligent that then you can apply back and say, does this actually work for our organization? Is this a premium that we want to apply? And that's where you have to get consistent with how you document, because part of the pay gap is really about inconsistency and identifying each person as a special snowflake and not being able to track why you pay what you pay.
You were telling me a really interesting detail about Cindy in the backstage before we entered, that it also helps you address the workers that are not getting compensated or getting a bonus. So how to address those people, because you're handling human emotions at the end of the day. And we were discussing this before our talk, that our paycheck reflects to us a lot of our worth. So it's a hard thing to micromanage, let's say.
That's exactly right. Pay is such a strong signal to the culture that you're providing in your company. We've all been in a company where someone's been promoted, and when the email goes out, you can almost hear that resounding chorus amongst your coworkers in the office of like, yes, this person got promoted, they're a rock star. Or I'm sure you've all been in the room when it's the opposite. And the person gets promoted, and there's just this feeling of,
why?
That's what I need to emulate? Those types of behaviors?
Being rewarded?
Exactly. And so for managers, particularly in a moment when people managers are making these pay decisions, and not only are they making pay decisions, but they have to be accountable to explaining why. And not just explaining why to the person who got promoted, that's easy. You got promoted, here's your skills, here's your capabilities, here's where I've seen you grown. So I'm explaining to the person that got promoted, but now in a second, I need to get those talking points to explain to the 12 people who didn't get promoted. Why wasn't it you? What is it going to take for you to gain the skills to be on that same path? And this is more and more common going to the people managers for every single pay decision. As companies start to eradicate the layer of HR business partners, they start to streamline, they start to consolidate, they remove layers. So this explainability is really critical to get in the hands of your people.
And how does AI do it? How does it help?
It's a great question. So one of the things we do with Cindy that our customers have been asking for is they want explainability and all of the analysis of the data as to why they pay what they pay in the hands of people who are on the front line. So whether that's a recruiter making an offer to a candidate, be able to explain why is the offer why is it what it is? Why are you at the point in the range that you're in, and giving those clear examples that align with the comp philosophy, all the way through the people manager, again, having that promotion conversation and being able to ask in an instant, give me talking points so that I can explain to the 10 folks who weren't promoted. My team meeting's in 5 minutes. And you extend that even further, and it starts to really play into
it's an
this feedback
uncomfortable
loop.
position to be in.
Exactly.
Hey, I can help. I understand that pay policy is usually a big aspect of what attracts talent to a corporation, and right now we're witnessing businesses say, oh, it's hard to recruit, it's hard to keep talent in-house. You've been handling 350 companies when it comes to their pay equity policies. What's the biggest lie companies are telling themselves about why they can't attract top talent? Because it's out there.
One of the biggest lies companies are telling themselves is that their attrition has nothing to do with pay. And one thing that is very clear is that when you aren't consistent about what you pay new people coming in, what you're often doing is applying pay policies to those shiny new folks that negatively impact the people that are already working in your organization. So what you need to do is in real time be able to identify, is a pay decision going to negatively impact the people that already work for you that are top performers? This is something called compression, when you bring people in and you compress the workers that are already in your organization. And the problem with that from a culture and attrition perspective is when people find this out, it is a toxin in the culture because it drives attrition. People want to know that they are paid fairly for the work that they do. You'll see in a lot of big companies where people actually start to believe in order to get an increase, they have to leave and come back as that shiny new talent. And so for organizations, it's really critical that they understand and can explain why they pay what they pay, so existing workers know that they're paid fairly.
And companies hiring globally can often create new inequities, by not thinking holistically about their compensation packages. So what if transparency laws that we have coming and are colliding with AI create more problems than they solve?
So the EU directive on pay transparency, of which Portugal is a part, companies are starting to release their specific drafts. And one of the things embedded in this is something called right to information, or RTI. And RTI plays right into what you and I were talking about in that workers and employees now have the right to ask for comparable salaries. And that really, again, just breaks open this nut of explainability. So if companies don't know why they pay what they pay, or they can't speak about that in a way with confidence that they feel confident about, it really creates a big problem from a cultural perspective, as we were just saying. And this compliance acceleration is not slowing down. We're seeing it in the States, we're seeing it across the EU, and we're seeing it expand from there.
What's possible when combining intelligence into the hiring process? You're bridging something that's very uniquely human, and you want your teams to feel seen, not just connected, and you want them to be intertwined in your goals of your corporation too. So when you're supporting human judgment with technology, what can come from that?
It's important that you think about AI as recommendations. AI is not making the decision. AI is recommending something based on analyzing whole swaths of data in an instant, and that's what's really exciting. You have this confluence of two things happening. You have the acceleration of transparency legislation and compliance, like we just talked about, and then you have this incredible transformational technology. And when you think of those coming together, the ability for AI to look across all of your data. So again, not just market pay, but market pay, pay equity, your internal employee data sets, your offer data, and to in an instant be able to share with a people manager not only what the recommendation should be, but also the explanation and the talking points. But that people manager ultimately is the one making the decision. The people manager must be the one deciding that. The AI is there as a recommendation tool, as an ability to analyze, and an ability to embed that intelligence of that decision into future decisions. That's really where the power of this technology comes in.
So you're talking about people managers. So it's not just about giving them the tools. It's also about teaching them how to manage those tools. So my question is, how are managers doing with regarding to AI? Are they ready for it?
I think in a lot of organizations, people managers are clamoring for this type of technology in order to help them have these conversations. Because the most uncomfortable thing for a people manager or a recruiter in talking with the candidate are those difficult conversations about pay. For those of you who have been a people manager, I'm sure you've experienced the conversations about pay on the positive. Again, when you're promoting someone, those are fun.
That's easy.
Yeah, those are easy. Those are some of the best conversations in your career. But when you're having a conversation that's a performance-based conversation, a conversation about why someone wasn't picked, this is where AI can become a tool that people managers embrace, and they embrace very quickly. If you think of all those moments in the employee life cycle where you have to have a conversation about pay, having those recommendations at your fingertips that are aligned with your comp philosophy and consistent. Let's say someone is putting in their notice and you want to make a counteroffer. How often are those counteroffers actually a complete waste of time and money? And if you were able to track them and see the outcome of those counteroffers, you would know, for example, Cindy would say, hey, I see you're about to make a counteroffer to this employee that's about to leave. Just wanted to flag for you that every time you've done this over the past year, the person has left anyway. So let's really think carefully about what a consistent counter recommendation would be based on the intelligence that we've gathered for your organization. And this is just not something people managers have access to. They're throwing darts against a dartboard wearing a blindfold. There's just not that key intelligence around not only the decisions, but also how to explain them.
But if it's all pulling from data and it's pulling from statistics, everyone in statistics knows there are always outliers, and there's power in those outliers. So how does AI adapt to that odd one out? So you're saying, 10 of the people you tried this with quit or left the corporation, but this could work for this specific worker or that specific worker. that there's room for that focus and margin of error.
Absolutely, and that's why you need the human in the loop, because there's always going to be outliers, there's always going to be exceptions. But in continuing to train AI as to what those exceptions look like, that's where you start to identify, was this truly an outlier or was this a trend? Is this something that consistently is a measure of outperformance that we can track, or was this simply a one-off?
Where does trust stay?
Trust
What
is
happens?
it is so critical, and there's so many studies that show where AI is falling down in organizations, where it's not being adopted, is when there's just not trust, because it's presented recommendations or answers or math that has hallucinations in it. So trust is really imperative, and this is important from the beginning, that you have organizations and vendors that you're working with that understand the power of this technology and understand all of the data that's going into it and are testing for accuracy. Because when you have those instances and the trust is lost, that's really where adoption just completely tanks.
How do you build trust in AI tech tools, specifically when it comes to stuff that is so sensible, both to the people manager and to the worker being addressed?
You've got to have transparency. So one of the things that is part of transparency is showing the work of the agent. So being able to say, the way that I got to this recommendation is by looking at these 3 factors, and actually showing the work. Or saying, for example, you want to make an offer that's at the 90th percentile for pay, but this candidate is at the 35th percentile for experience of the peers they would be joining. That's why the offer is less than what you'd like it to be. So all of those explainability, contextual moments, showing the work of the AI, showing the algorithm in many cases, and a lot of this is required by the EU Act as well.
So it's basically about automation serving people, not the other way around. So, because there's a lot of skepticism when it comes to using AI tools for hiring or for compensation packages. And I would imagine, I've never been in that position, that it's really hard to address a worker and be like, I'm deciding your bonus based off of an LLM. If I was in that position, I would be really skeptical.
That's exactly right, which is why you have to be able to have explainability built in. So when you think about an agent making a recommendation and you ask the agent, tell me more, why is this recommendation what it is? It needs to be able to clearly articulate where that recommendation is coming from.
So I want to ask you, what's the feedback so far? I know it's been being used by over 300 companies. You're building it for the past year. What's the feedback?
The feedback has been really positive, and I think it's positive for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're the only solution that's providing pay recommendations with the constraint of pay equity built in. And that's a really important differentiator. Because again, you're not perpetuating and exacerbating biases. If you were just looking at something like market pay alone, that's going to just continue to perpetuate issues versus taking all of this data, including things like compression, pay equity, making sure that you're balancing that. So our customers have really liked that. They also really appreciate the ability to flag when a decision is going to open up, let's say a pay gap that they'll have to report on in the next cycle.
So what comes next?
Yeah.
Any news?
What comes next for us?
Yeah, I'm trained to look for news, so I'm just trying to see.
Always on the look for news. I love it. No, what comes next for us really are the release of multiple comp expert agents. So if you think about extending this to something like job leveling, so job leveling is something that happens upstream, but again, there's so much nuance and inconsistency into how jobs are leveled. In the US, so many of the cases and litigation is around the systemic under-leveling of roles. So if AI can start to analyze things like job descriptions, analyze leveling frameworks, analyze all of that information, and very quickly, in a second, when you're about to post a new rec, identify for you, based on what I know, this is leveled as a P7, it should actually be a P6. In that instant, you've just saved 15%, which compounds year over year by having someone leveled incorrectly.
Maria, we're almost at the end of our talk. There's probably 2,500 more companies here today and this week. What's your advice to them when it comes to managing pay? You know, a lot of these tech companies, start off with a great salary, but we hear stories about stagnation. A lot of large corporations here are, mega structure when it comes to workers' compensation. So, what's your advice that you're going to go out there and give them?
Yeah, my advice is that once you find the talent and you make that decision, the next decision you make about what to pay that person is the most important decision you will make. And so as organizations investing in technology that can help provide recommendations as to what to pay people that takes into account everything from market, competitive rates, and fairness, is going to really change the game and your ability to signal to your culture what you want to be about. If you want to be pay for performance, that's really important that it's reflected in how you pay people.
So maybe the new hiring map is not just about how we choose to find people, but how we choose to see them.
Absolutely. There's so much talk in hiring about how to find and select people. And I would say we need to spend just as much time thinking about how do we pay people once we've found them. And that would be my advice.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for your
Thank
time
you,
this
everyone.
morning. Thank you.
Thank you.